And welcome everybody to our periodical appointment with Il Pietrisco PROSE, and in particular with our seminars, Facets of Health Humanities, where we wanted to analyze the different artistic production and their specificities to see what they offer to the study in the area of the health humanities. Today, Dr. Rossella Riccobono is going to speak about cinema and health humanities, in particular with a lecture entitled Cinema, Bereavement, and the Health Humanities. Just a quick overview on her abstract. So the end of life and palliative care have become central services in our communities as research around the importance of preparing to die grows and acquires more prominence in a society that promises to become more ethical and empathetic towards the well-being of the isolated and marginalized. The structure of the hospice not only offers palliative care for the dying, but it also has more and more turned into a center where community can be fostered and where the family of the terminally ill patients also receive support. One such group of people are the bereaved. The use of film and poetry and other art-based interventions in palliative care have proven to be successful in supporting pain, both physical and emotional. This seminar will look at the use of film to continue to offer care, cultivate community, and process bereavement within the institution of the hospice. I'm sure that we will find very useful and interesting Dr. Riccobono point of view and the support to the research on these aspects. So a few technical details before leaving the floor to Rossella. All our lectures are recorded because we often have people ask if it's possible to have access to them afterwards, as they cannot attend at this time. The lectures are therefore available on YouTube. So if you do not want to appear on the screen, please turn your camera off. And I also kindly ask you to mute your mics so that there is no interference. Of course, there will be time for questions after lectures, so you can either raise your virtual hand so that we can see that you want to ask a question, or you can send the question through the chat to me or to the general chat. Some of the students have asked if they can have a certificate of attendance, and yes, you can. Just need to request it through Il Pietrisco, emailing us at prose@pietrisco.net. I will add the address in this section chat at the end of Rossella lecture. The last thing to add, our next lecture will be on 31 of March, and it will be focused on Elena Ferrante and health humanities. So we will see in 2 weeks on this topic with me and with Olivia Santovetti from University of Leeds. Without any further hesitation, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Rossella, who is a really happily and independent scholar, retired scholar from the University of St. Andrews. She has taught and researched in Italian studies since 1991, firstly at the University of Edinburgh, then at the Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, and then finally at the University of St. Andrews. Her main areas of interest are Italian poetry and cinema. She has written on the poetry of Eugenio Montale and Cesare Pavese, and on the cinema of Nanni Moretti and Mario Mortone. She's currently working on reading of English poetry, Myra Schneider's autobiography, Writing Myself Through Cancer, and its use within the field of health humanity. So with any further hesitation, please, Rossella, you can start. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Maela. I'm going to share my my presentation, so just making sure that you can see it. And
we can.
And then I'll see if I can. Okay. Right. Okay. So yeah. So thank you for your kind presentation, Maela, and welcome everybody. Starting to be light here in Scotland at this time, but you know, it's still afternoon for me. Okay. So we'll start going with that. I'm starting with this. Right. Okay. So my paper tonight, I need to ask you something. Can you see me as I speak, or do you see? Do you?
Yes, we can see you.
Oh,
A
okay.
small box with your face and.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just because I'm also recording. I just wanted to make sure that it was recording right. So okay.
I can see everybody here. So not only Rossella and the PowerPoint, but also myself and everybody attending the conference.
Right. Okay. So right. Okay. So without any delay, I'm gonna start. So my paper, as Maela said, is entitled "Cinema, Bereavement, and the Health Humanities." And I just wanted to have a very little, you know, kind of short statement that I wanted to make. My father died about 3 weeks ago, nearly a month ago. And I didn't know that that was going to happen when I was starting to write this paper. And therefore, I just wanted to say that I'd like to dedicate what I'm doing and my work to him and to his memory. And actually, you know, cinema and bereavement, I have never experienced bereavement, and therefore, yes, that's an extra maybe side and facet of my paper now. But anyway, my paper is divided into two sections, and the first section is going to be dealing with intervention of arts within the environment of the hospice. And the hospice, which has been modernized and created in its modern version on the founding principles formulated and developed by Cicely Saunders that you see here on the first slide of my slide projection. She basically devised the idea that the community of the hospice, where patients are coming to die, and usually patients are referred to the hospice when they're diagnosed, you know, with 1 year left of life. They basically, you know, what she wanted was a care that was based on listening and was based on horizontal relations between medic and patients. So the community of the hospice is not just, you know, basically that includes patients, the medic, the professional carers, but it also includes the family, and it also includes the bereaved once the patients die. Okay, so it's actually a kind of really innovative kind of idea. The second part of the paper instead looks at a couple of films. I'm not going to have the time to look at both films, so I'm going to be slightly elliptical on some of the things that I say because of time mainly. But I will look at film from the viewpoint of queer phenomenology, which is a kind of a quite new way, quite new method of looking at film and looking at literature as well, that was devised by Sarah Ahmed, and I will refer to her writing quite a bit. So my intention in the paper is to present this novel way of studying film so that more interventions within the hospice environment can be used for the improvement of the services and the relationship of support that staff may be able to offer to the community around which the hospice operates and thrives. Now, I did work in when I was actually doing trials and interventions in the hospice. So there's one in particular, actually two of them, two Edinburgh-based hospices where I worked with patients, mainly on poetry. But I also gave some lectures on film for the support of personnel and forming personnel so that they could support patients as well. And so I kind of feel that the research, which sometimes can be a little bit theoretical, is well weighed by the experience of working, with hands-on in the hospice with people that work there and actually attend and die there. So the dominant model. So I'm going to start with part one. So the dominant model on which palliative care institutions have historically developed is based on the medical clinic hospital involving the service of medics and nursing professionals to treat patients or to administer palliatives to prevent pain. And despite Cecily Saunders' active work within the hospice movement to render the journey to death as a stage of life, and the hospice institution as a place of life where being part of a community would be regarded as the most effective preparation for death in a holistic sense, the hospice institution has resisted for many decades as modeled on the medical institutions. Saunders particularly emphasized the importance of listening to the patient's story and understanding the experience of suffering in a rounded way, which brought to the development of the concept of total pain, the condition that includes physical symptoms, mental distress, social problems, and emotional difficulties. So central to Saunders' philosophy is the powerful relationship between the patient and the practitioner, where power relations are on an equal par and where patients are encouraged to, in inverted commas, I'm quoting Cecily Saunders, formulate their values, articulate and achieve health needs and fulfill their responsibilities. The model of the hospice, as conceived by Cecily Saunders, is the epitome of the institution that we would wish to see actualized through our commitment and studies in the health humanities. And it is therefore an institution which will actually be central in health humanities. It has already achieved some of the things that we're actually working on and researching towards. So one of the aspects of the hospice that allows it to be continuously innovative is the research that its staff are involved in, to include as much as possible art therapy for patients in palliative care, but also for their family and the professional carers. Art therapy, classed as an alternative sensory therapy, has made its contribution to recent important developments of palliative health care, and that are in line and continue to actualize Saunders' visions of a more person-centered healthcare. So the use of art therapy in the palliative daycare unit may be one of the most powerful ways for patients to connect to each other, to their families and their professional staff in a new and much deeper way in order to transform their journey towards death as a life experience. And just as a quick glossa, I wanted to add that I exactly worked in the day care unit, which is where patients attend daily, from maybe 9 to 3 in the afternoon. I haven't worked in the wards, however, but I'm sure there's a lot of space to work there as well. It's less group-based work, it's more individual work, one-on-one. So this concept of transforming death into a life experience falls in line with Professor David Kuhl, who has conducted research in the field of medical humanities on the connections of the experience of facing death and embracing life. And he states in one of his works, what dying people want is the same as what living people want, primarily a sense of connection to themselves, to those they love and who love them, and to a sense or essence of something greater than themselves. So just very briefly, following the readers organization, I'm going to talk about the project that I had ideated in 2015 and is still supporting my research in health humanities and in work within the hospice, which at the moment is voluntary work, of course, because I've, as Smaila said, happily retired from the university. So in 2015, following the method of read to lead, which is basically reading in groups, reading aloud in small groups and then discussing, usually around characters rather than, there's quite a lot of success usually that I've observed in how whoever is the participant, whether they are well or their patients or whatever, end up voluntarily offering some of their stories. Okay, so I ideated PROSE. I'll show you in a moment. So PROSE, which is an acronym for Poetry as Unifying Shared Experience, and GIFT, which is the Get into Film Talking. And I've worked a lot more with PROSE, but I've also given lectures on GIFT. And specifically, these two projects, which use the shared poetry reading and shared film watching experience to elicit discussion and promote stronger connections for patients in palliative care, their families and professional carers. The project, through its potential ability to facilitate pause, mutual listening and storytelling, may be the key in strengthening the philosophy on which Cicely Saunders' vision of the hospice was conceived and developed by a practice and research as a place where patients do not feel isolated by their inability or fear to discuss their terminal condition, but instead can be with their loved ones, their family, and professional staff. So the practice of pause in an Edinburgh-based hospice and the lectures are delivered to professional staff on poetry and film in the same hospice took into consideration Saunders' visions of the modern hospice and her approach to person-centered care, whereby the patient becomes the driver of the art activity and following the discussion. So this was actually modeled on the idea that the patient becomes the driver of his own healthcare. Okay, so in this case, it becomes the driver of the discussion. The facilitator, I was the facilitator of the group discussion, remains simply a facilitator, not a leader. So the role of the professional staff is that of supporting the patient to find a voice and be empowered so that the encounter between professional staff and patients can reorient itself on a more horizontal relationship. One of the groups which continue to receive emotional support within the hospice is that of the bereaved, which form part of the person-centered care offered within the community-based institution of the hospice. It is in connection with the bereaved that using film, the part of GIFT, as therapy was hypothesized and feasible, as feasible given the length of the text, which would have been too proving and tiring for terminal illness patients, and given that patients are generally on a high level of medication, their attention is short, they usually suffer from fatigue, etc. So with them, I was using very short poetry texts, or I could use shorts, 10 minutes at the very most. But long feature films are definitely for people that are well, at least that have the span of attention to follow the film, and the bereaved fall under this category. So let me briefly introduce Pause and Gift. So Pause and Gift, as I say, from the volume Artist Therapy by John Armstrong and Alain de Botton, inspired me and helped me in devising Pause and Gift. They propose visual arts as having a clear and therapeutic function in people's lives. And specifically, they refer to and analyze the 7 functions of visual art as, and I've listed them here: remembering, hope, sorrow, rebalancing, self-understanding, growth, and appreciation. So this, my project, Pose and Gift, takes into consideration the therapeutic functions intrinsic to art and extends them to poetry and film in order to verify the therapeutic effects and impact on people's lives with a focus on people in palliative care. I'm basing myself on the concept of third space as theorized by Homi Bhabha, post-colonial theory, and on relational storytelling and on the philosophy of vocal expression as theorized by Adriana Cavarero, an Italian philosopher. I concluded that reading poetic texts aloud or watching shorts or full feature films and discussing them in small groups can turn the discussion room within the hospice into a third space. And I will explain immediately what third space means, just in case some of you are not familiar with it. So by third space, Bhabha refers to a space of encounter and exchange where people are able to negotiate between their identity. So the first space being usually your home, your familiar space where you are actually comfortable and yourself. You can be in your pajamas and you know where to reach for a cup of tea without even looking, okay? So familiarity, and the regulations to which they may be subjected whilst admitted or visiting the medical institution, which is called the second space, where you are no longer free, but you're subjected to regulations. So it's unfamiliar. Is the space of the institution. So third space is actually space in between. So within a discussion room that is perceived as a third space, patients, family members, and healthcare professionals are present as human beings within their physical, with a physical voice, their feelings and personal experiences, engaged in reading poetry aloud, listening, discussing, and relating more deeply with each other whilst exchanging their stories. So the third space is a negotiation between feeling familiar within the institution, and usually works better if there is a room which is dedicated to, where you can actually be free from the regulations, or at least for an hour or so. So the activity of exchanging stories to be understood here as discussion around poetic characters, stories, fictional stories, which may have a metaphorical meaning that may be picked up freely by the participants and may resonate deeply with them. The use of the physical voice in group activities helps the poetic metaphors resonating more deeply with their lives. If the group of the bereaved have already been exposed to poetry, as when they were part of the family, we had small groups. We were thinking of small groups, I didn't experience them, but we were thinking of having small groups of professional carers, small groups of patients, which are worked with, small groups of professional carers and patients together, but also small groups of professional carers, family, and patients, in order to be able to facilitate communication around, the 3 groups, so that people do not feel that they can't talk to each other about death, about their dying. You often find that it's very difficult to sometimes break the news to someone who's dying from the family. So that we all know, that the patient knows is dying, the family knows the patient's dying, but they're just scared of talking about it. And where does the professional staff stand? And so this is a way, the quickest way of freeing, of bursting the elephant in the room, as they say, so you can actually have no big obstacle in between groups of people, and people end up losing their taboo, their fears about talking of what is going on. We've actually, through research, has been found out that actually that brings anxiety down massively in all 3 groups of people. And let's not forget the professional carers. They are constantly exposed to anxiety and to pain as well. So So if the bereaved have been part already, maybe of a group with either shorts or poetry, they are already familiar with the methods, and the method is exactly the same, that of watching the film together and then discussing it in small groups. Usually the film is watched maybe at home, or they can watch the film if they've got 3 hours, they can watch the films and then discuss it together. But it's usually quite, so we tend to use shorter films, maybe half an hour, and then discuss for maybe up to 45 minutes. Okay, so I'm on my second part of the paper, and now I'm turning to film studies, and I would like to start from a quote from French philosophers. In fact, actually, I would like to very briefly explain, just so I don't assume anything, make things clear that what is phenomenology and what is queer phenomenology. So phenomenology, from phenomenon, that which appears, and logos study is the philosophical study of the structures of experience and consciousness, or as Edmund Husserl, who actually devised it in between 1911 and 1913 and defines it, phenomenology is the reflective study of the essence of consciousness as experienced from the first person point of view. And the films that I've chosen actually have explicitly a first person point of view. I'll explain that in a moment. Queer phenomenology was devised by Sarah Ahmed, and is groundbreaking study that basically uses queer studies, uses the word queer, but queer was a word, or queering was a word that was used by Husserl at the beginning of last century, by meaning reorientation in space. So often he was talking about the desk, and how you can go from one side of the desk or the other side of the desk, whether you're the medic or the patient, and you've got power relations depending on what side of the desk you're sitting on. So queering is reorienting. Okay, so then that word has actually been used for queer studies as well, for studies on sexuality. Sarah Ahmed is a scholar who became homosexual when she was about between 45 and 55. And she experienced, she says, a huge illumination of her perspective on the world from that queering, from that reorienting, sexual reorienting. But actually she's applied the word queering from queer studies to phenomenology, and she's also used the Orientalism by Said in order to put fruit to phenomenology, make phenomenology less abstract and more useful in social relations, for example. Okay, so that's why I'm applying queer phenomenology, because it works really well. And so reorienting, so we will see death as a moment of crisis, obviously of loss, which has the power and the ability, and in good and bad, to create a disorientation. Okay, so we're talking about disorientation and reorientations. So, Maurice Merleau-Ponty in 1962, but I've got a 1964 translation, stated, "We grasp external spaces through our bodily situation, our corporeal or postural schema gives us." Could I ask everybody to please mute your microphones? Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Right, so I'm starting. So Maurice Merleau-Ponty states, "We grasp external spaces through our bodily situation. A corporeal postural schema gives us a global, practical, and implicit notion of the relation between our body and things, and how to hold on them. A system of possible movements of motor projects radiates from us to the environment, our body is not in space like things. It inhabits or haunts space. It implies itself to space like a hand to an instrument. And when we wish to move about, we do not move the body as we move an object. So I'm going to offer some ideas on my work based on this, on the fact that when we orient ourselves in space, we are not objects, but we form relationships with everything that surrounds us. And the two films that I've chosen are films by an Italian film director, Nanni Moretti. Some of you will know him. Some of you might not know him. He is one of the main film directors, but not obviously the only one. Some of my colleagues used to say to me, because I used to teach him, and everybody said, it's only Moretti. But his film, The Sun's Room, is actually quite well known, I think. And Mia Madre, so the Sun's Room talks about the death of a son, and it was released in 2001, and I've written on it. And My Mother, Mia Madre, was released in 2015. So whilst The Sun's Room is not an autobiographical film, in the sense that, you know, he's not talking about things that happened to him. So Nanni Moretti, famously, you know, he is the film director, but he usually also is the main protagonist in his films. And people have talked about his filmography as autobiographical, and it's not true. It's not true because he obviously projects himself onto a protagonist, which is semi-autobiographical, but is obviously present with his face as an actor, center stage. So whilst The Sun's Room is not a story that connects with his life in any way, but it was based on news on an industrialist son who died at sea while he was scuba diving off the coast of I think, Naples or near Naples. My Mother is actually an autobiographical film because he wrote it and directed it after his mother died. And so he says that very clearly, that it's a film that reoriented the cinematography, and then we'll talk very briefly about that as well. So, so mindful that we've already stated that the death of a dear one is a traumatic and disorienting event, I am reverting to another Italian scholar. He's called Pierpaolo Antonello. He works in Cambridge, and his article, which is called Di crisi in meglio, from crisis to better, refers to Nanni Moretti, not La stanza del figlio, not The Sun's Room, but another film. But Nanni Moretti, in a way, always talks about a reorientation in his films. I don't have time to go into that, but it was a film that dealt with the reorientation of political parties in Italy in 1989 after the Berlin Wall came down, called La Palombella Rossa, Redwood Pigeon, and it talks about the death of Italian communism and birth of the Second Republic. Okay, so still it is a death, and Moretti is a very political. So if Moretti used to be political in his previous filmography, after La Palombella Rossa in 1989, he deals with micropolitics, and one of the themes that he starts dealing with is the micropolitic of family. So here we are. So Pierpaolo Antonello says, moments of disorientation are vital. They are bodily experiences that throw the world up and throw the body from its ground. So both Margherita and Giovanni, the two main protagonists, brother and sister in Mia Madre, the two son and daughter of the mother who is dying in the film, as well as Giovanni and Paola. Giovanni and Paola are the parents of Andrea, who dies in The Sun's Room. He also has a sister called Irene. So all these protagonists are portrayed to be completely disoriented in his films. So in this study of La stanza del figlio and Mia Madre by Nanni Moretti, we shall analyze how the bodies of the main protagonists, which I've already mentioned now, project their bodies into their different worlds their home and working spaces, their relationships with significant others, and the surrounding objects, establishing postural schema that have shaped their lives, movements, and motor projects for years. We shall examine how the arrival of trauma produces a queering effect on their bodies, reorienting their body direction towards others, their professions, and their relevant objects within space. And we shall read this, as I said before, from the viewpoint of queer phenomenology. So, So bodies take shape as they move through the world, directing themselves toward or away from objects and others. Being orientated means feeling at home, knowing where one stands, or having certain objects within reach. Orientations affect what is proximate to the body or what can be reached. So queer phenomenology, where queering means reorienting, shows how social relations are arranged spatially, how queerness disrupts and reorders these relations by not following the accepted paths, and how a politics of disorientation puts their objects within reach, those that might, at first glance, seem awry. We will try and determine in which way the straight postures of the central focal points of perceptions, the main protagonists, and the four I've already mentioned, that have been aligned and held in place with their surrounding worlds for many years come out of line or are queered. The change of orientation caused by the arrival of traumatic events affects their ways of directing their desires, and as a consequence also their mode of extending into their habitual spaces, both in their home and professional dimensions, changing thus also the way those spaces are perceived by the protagonists as well as by the audience. The sudden and unexpected death of, or imminent death of a significant other caused disorientation, which is perceived as bodily feeling, shattering the order of their lives, and the three protagonists and central viewpoints of the narration's experience as an effect. So experience as an effect on their life as a crisis. So disorientation can be an ordinary moment from which we can learn. These ordinary moments are clearly experienced by all three protagonists, as well as by the dying mother in her drifting from one world to the next and back again. So generally between the hospital and back home where she's cared for, and back again in the hospital, and then she dies at home, losing the contours between each of them as she focuses and transitions between the home and the hospital. So I just wanted to then such moments of switching dimensions, says Sarah Ahmed in her work, can be disorienting or disorientating. Is disorientation a bodily sign of its disorganization as the failure of an organization to hold things in place? What do such moments of disorientation tell us? What do they do? And what can we do with them? Okay, so she's arguing that it's nothing to do with having a disorganized body, but it's actually something that in a way manages to organize, reorganize our body and our desire. And usually illness is perceived in phenomenology as the interruption of someone's desire, of our freedom, of our desire. So the point, she continues, and this is really interesting, the point is not whether we experience disorientation, for we will and we do, but how such experiences can impact on the orientation of bodies and spaces, which is after all about how the things are directed and how they're shaped by the lines they follow. The point is what we do with such moments of disorientation, as well as what such moments can do, whether they can offer us the hope of new directions, and whether new directions are reason enough for hope. So the reason why I chose Nanni Moretti is exactly because he follows this, you know, after the death or in preparation for the death of the mother, the main, let's say, viewpoints, protagonists in the films are disoriented. They somehow either find a new direction or they do not find a new direction, because Nanni Moretti often cuts and stops the film, you know, um, abruptly, you know, as reality does, you know, so it doesn't offer a convenient ending, you know, but it definitely offers some hints of hope. And I thought that Ahmed was really resonating with what, especially that Sun's Room was actually released before Ahmed wrote the book. So, you know, they match, they resonate with each other. So how are the traumas experienced by the three protagonists in both films disorienting their lives, disorienting their modes, they inhabit their spaces, and how they're able to offer new directions in their lives, and also to the significant ones around them, because we can't forget that Giovanni Sermonti and Paola, his wife, they also have a daughter who is left behind, Irene. And in the film, if you actually have the film, if you want to watch the film, The Sun's Room, I really enjoy the film, it's a lovely film. You actually see that the only character that's not explored properly by the film director and is left a little bit in between the husband and wife's crisis is Irene, is the daughter. She's actually completely disoriented. She stays disoriented until the end. Possibly it's been done on purpose as well, you know, to show that there is not always a path that is clear, you know, like the father and mother, but, you know, but I will talk about that a little bit more towards the end, as well as the central protagonists who project the main viewpoints in the two films. Giovanni Sermonti in La stanza del figlio and Margherita and Giovanni in Mia Madre. We also need to consider the more peripheral characters which they have to relate to and how the relationships change after their lives have been disoriented. So we have Paola, the wife, Irene, the daughter, and Arianna, the ex-girlfriend of Andrea, unknown to the parents from La stanza del figlio. She's actually the factor who comes in and somehow saves them. And also in Mia Madre, we have other characters, Livia, the daughter of the daughter, okay, the granddaughter, and Vittorio, the ex-husband of the daughter. Merleau-Ponty, referring to Stratton's work, Vision Without Inversion. And again, here we are going to George Malcolm Stratton, who was a psychologist. And in 1897, he actually wrote this, or actually did some seminal work and wrote this seminal paper and, you know, kind of essay, which is called Vision Without Inversion of the Retina. And he says we remain, in which he was actually doing a lot of experiments of, you know, switching around through lenses, you know, left to right and right to left, and, you know, upside down, and, you know, in all directions, to see what his vision, how through his vision he would experience reality. And then he wrote this essay where he says we remain physically upright not through the mechanism of the skeleton or even through the nervous regulation of muscular tone, but because we are caught up in a world. It's a world of relationships, obviously, of objects, of spaces. If this involvement is seriously weakened, the body collapses and becomes once more an object. And again, here there's more resonance with the fact that once we are disoriented, we move around like objects. Disorientation involves becoming an object, which reverts us back to the Cartesian method of analysis, which sees the world as objects, sets of objects, and objects acting and reacting upon one another, countering the very essence of phenomenology as a method of study of the structures of experience and consciousness. So it's actually also quite interesting how Descartes had an idea which was based more than on relationships, simply on the world as a set of objects. So these orientations involve the failed orientations. In fact, we see that in the films, everything that was in the becoming fails. So Giovanni Sermonti in La stanza del figlio is a well-established psychoanalyst, and he stops, he can no longer go on. So he closes his study. His wife is no longer able to, she's an architect, to work. His daughter is no longer able to study properly at school. She starts failing subjects, so she leaves her boyfriend, etc. And in Mia Madre, so for a change, so you see the reorientation there after the death of the mother, of the autobiographical mother by Moretti. It's no longer Moretti who is the director in the film within the film, but it's actually Margherita Bui, the you know, his sister. So Nanni Moretti, as in the character of Giovanni, watches the scene. Still, it's a double first-person perspective on the film. There's Giovanni and there's his sister. So the sister is the director, and she fails in her film. She stops the film loses prominence completely, and Giovanni gives up his job, gives up his career. Even if he's in his 50s, he decides to retire and do something else. So this kind of you know, failure follows the disorientation. And Ahmed states that when such lines block rather than enable action, they become points that accumulate stress or stress points. Bodies can even take the shape of such stress as points of social and physical pressure that can be experienced as a physical press on the surface of the skin. Disorientation could be described here as becoming oblique of the world, becoming a becoming that is at once interior and exterior, and that as that which is given, or as that which gives what is given its new angle. Whether the strangeness is in the object or is in the body that is near the object remains a crucial question. Okay, so the relationship is changed, and I really wanted to show you now a scene from the so I'm going to stop the share of my PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you a share of the film. Let's see if I can, here we go, share. Oops, sorry, stop share. I need to find the minimize that. Okay, yes, okay, so here we go. Excuse me, a little bit of delay here. So here we go, portion, share, and I should be able to. Okay, are you able to see the scene here?
Corpo di Cristo.
Are you seeing? No.
No, not yet.
I can see it, but.
We could hear it, but we couldn't see it.
So, are you seeing now?
Corpo di Cristo.
No, we can see the screen.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. Oh, I don't know what to do.
Maybe you. Well.
Okay, I'll stop the share and I'll try in a different way then.
Is that a link, Rossella? You can share the link on the chat, in the chat? No, it's not.
The link because it's. Can you see anything here? Is it just a gray screen?
It's just gray.
I'm so sorry. Okay, look, what I'm going to do is I don't want to waste time on this one. It's such a shame. What I'm going to, could you hear at least?
No.
You could.
Hear it?
Could you hear, Tony?
Yeah.
Could you hear?
Yes. When you press play, I could hear it, yeah.
You could hear it, but you couldn't see it.
Couldn't see it.
Right, okay. So let's see if I can.
Maybe Cecilia, do you want to add something?
No, I was just, the very first time, Rossella, we could see the kind of the panel, the control panel underneath.
Yeah.
And we could hear it.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try again to share with the advanced. Hopefully it will be advanced enough. And if I do this, share computer sound, optimize, share. Let's see if I can. Can you hear it?
Yes, I can hear it.
We can hear.
You can hear. So some people can and some people can't.
Yeah, we can hear, just hear.
I can hear, yes.
Because it's in Italian, it was more useful to see it really. I need to describe. I will have to describe it and maybe send. I'm so sorry, but I've got another couple that are on a link, but this one I couldn't find it on a link online, so I'll just describe it. Anyway, it's Nanni Moretti, sorry, Sermonti, his wife and Irene, with all their friends and families, they go to mass, and the priest has as a homily, which is a little bit of me being a faithful myself. I thought it was a bit of a strange homily to have at the funeral. And they get, rightly enough, annoyed. And I don't think our parish priest would have done that, or said that. In fact, I was at a funeral this morning and it was much more, you know, kind of merciful, etc. But anyway, they go to this. Nanni Moretti is not a believer. His wife is not a believer. You know, the protagonists are usually not believers, and so they go to mass. They got really annoyed at the homily. They go home, and something happens to Giovanni, the main character. He starts going around the house saying, "Well, look at this vase. It's broken. You know, it's actually, we glued it back together, but you can see it's broken. It's no longer the familiar vase. The whole house is no longer a familiar house as you have in your kitchen. You may be scratching the furniture." Everything scratched, he no longer recognizes the familiarity of his face. And then he sees his favorite teapot and he says, it's been glued together. We can't see that it's been broken, but it's broken, and he breaks it and it goes into, so husband and wife end up arguing. And it was actually really interesting because it's his relationship with the objects in the kitchen, which is one of the most familiar spaces that we inhabit, you know, because we spend time eating together and cooking, etc. And often at the beginning of the film, there are quite a few scenes where the mother is cooking, where they sit at the table and talk together. So that happy, familiar space has now been turned into an unfamiliar space. It's been a space where the main character feels disoriented. So I hope I've explained it enough, but I'll show you the other scenes, hopefully. There's two scenes that I can find online. Okay, so I'm going to reshare again my presentation. Here we go. And okay, so okay, so I've lost a little bit my citizen analysis of becoming oblique. I said that, and so queering it. Right, okay, so I'm near the end, okay? So just a little bit of patience because I'm just going to be a bit elliptical now, but the three areas that I've studied is queering the space. So basically, you know, studying the disorientation that the person who has suffered the trauma and has become disoriented feels with the space that is surrounding him or her. And we've already seen, you know, a moment in Nanni Moretti, La Stanza del Figlio, of queering the space as becoming unfamiliar with the objects. Now, because of the same problem, I'm just going to explain to you another scene, which is really, really important, I think. It's right at the beginning of the film, Nanni Moretti usually goes, sorry, I keep saying Nanni Moretti because it's the same face. It's Giovanni Sermonti usually goes for a run, and it's a city in the central east of Italy, which is called Ancona. And it's a town, it's a port, and he usually goes for a run all the way to the port and then back home. His apartment, Nanni Moretti took ages to find the right apartment. He wanted an apartment that was actually from which you could actually see the sea. It's an apartment of middle class, upper middle class. It's huge apartment, probably 2 apartments connected together, merged together. And the back half of the apartment is actually Giovanni Sermonti's psychoanalytical study or study room. It's not just a room, it's got an entrance, it's got a proper stair, it's got a study, it's got a waiting room, it's got a bathroom, and etc. So mini apartment. And then on the other side, with a different entrance, we actually have the family home, and they're connected by a door. Okay, so we often see this moment. So from the beginning until the death of Andrea, Giovanni Sermonti enters his flat mainly from his office, because his profession is on the forefront. And Husserl was talking a lot about the front of the house and the back of the house. So the front of the house was the space of the study, where men, of a certain class and social status had their office and their study and their drawing room and reading room, etc. And then the back of the house, which is less prominent, where the women were cooking or sewing and the children were playing. Okay, so this is actually very much reflected in Nanni Moretti's La stanza del figlio, the son's room, because the prominent part of the house is his room, his study room. After Andrea's death, his relationship with the study is, becomes difficult. Is put into crisis, and so there's often, the character Giovanni Sermonti who crosses, the threshold of, opens the door and crosses into the family home, and then it goes back. Now, after Andrea's death, the opposite happens. The family home becomes prominent. So people start entering from the house, from the family home entrance, and slowly and continuously the back of the house becomes the office. And then eventually Giovanni Sermonti closes down his career. He takes a break. We don't know what happens really in the end. So I thought that was actually really quite interesting. So the space is definitely queered within the film. I might just stop reading because I want to be a little bit faster now, because I wanted to go to the conclusions as well. So the second area that I studied was queering the relationship with objects, and we've seen a scene here. So not only the scene in the kitchen where Giovanni Sermonti becomes estranged from the objects, no longer recognizes the familiarity of the room, but also the clients that come in, the last few clients that come in to see Giovanni Sermonti as a psychoanalyst, they either suddenly feel better, no longer need them, or they argue with them. And one in particular, who is really quite paranoid and a little bit violent as well, he smashes everything in the study when Giovanni Sermonti says to him, "Look, I can no longer look after you because I'm in crisis. I can no longer do my job properly." And so his patient feels that as a betrayal, really. So he smashes all the professional objects and the pictures and whatever, the desk, there's a glass desk, so that's smashed. So there's that kind of disorientation with the objects, and then obviously queering the relationship with others, which we've kind of touched on when I mentioned the daughter, okay, this daughter who is very much disoriented more than the two parents. So just very briefly on Mia Madre, because I'm nearly at the end now. In fact, I've got the 2 clips here. So Mia Madre, as I said to you, is the story of the death of, enacted death of the autobiographical mother of Moretti. The sister is the film director. The brother is played by Nanni Moretti as Giovanni again. And what becomes central there, I don't want to waste time looking for the scene because it's again the same problem. I've got an external driver and probably that's why maybe it's not working. So what happens there is so the mother was a teacher of Latin. She had taught Latin in high school for many, many years, 40 years or so. And when she's in hospital, she loses her role within the family. But then at one point, the daughter, Livia, the granddaughter, she starts having problem at school with Latin. She doesn't understand why she has to study Latin, neither does her mother actually. And so Livia, is starting to get bad marks and is starting to be really unhappy. She falls in love with one of her schoolmates, but nothing happens there. That she's really unhappy. And obviously, the news of the grandmother dying, to whom she's really attached, makes things even worse. So that daughter is also disoriented. And what happens is the only person who is not disoriented within the film is actually the grandmother who's dying. And that's because she anchors herself to her role as a teacher that she held throughout her life. And when she goes back home and she's cared for from home, she actually becomes again the Latino teacher for Livia, her granddaughter. And that's what keeps the grandmother focused and positive until the end. And then I'll show you a quick, the photo at the end, maybe that shows that. So as well as the grandmother not being disoriented because she is able to hold on to the role of being teacher of Latin, the space within the house is always one of the wonderful flats that Nanni Moretti chooses, either in Rome or in another city, beautiful, with a beautiful study room that is the study of Latin language and literature, where the mother was preparing her classes. So that room becomes center stage towards the end of the film because it's the only anchor for the daughter and for the son to make sense of who the mother was. And there are 2 scenes, and I'm very sorry that I can't show them to you, but there's one scene which is not right at the end of the film. It's the scene that is obviously anachronistically, kind of pushed back into the film from the ideal end. Is the scene of the study room being packed up in boxes. All the books have gone into boxes, and you actually have this feeling of a ghost room, a room where you can no longer extend your body, not only towards the books or towards the desk. The relationships have gone from the room, and the flat has now been collapsed, really. Okay, it's no longer part of the world. But at the end of the film, and that's the end, and I'll show you the photo, which is this one. Okay, it's the second one. This is the daughter, Margherita Bui. And, she's in front of all the books that she's actually going around and touching them as if she's caressing her mother who just died the evening before. And what happens is, so these books are still there. She's going around the room, and she suddenly thinks of her mother. And she thinks of the last words that her mother said to her in hospital. She said, "Mom, what are you thinking of?" And the mother says, "I'm thinking about tomorrow." And so that's the end. So the film closes on this gaze of Margherita Bui looking forward to, being supported. So in a way, that room and that ending chosen by Nanni Moretti, rather than the room being packed up in boxes, I think is a very optimistic and shows hope. The top photograph instead is the photograph of Giovanni Sermonti, Irene and Paola, the family of La Stanza del Figlio, who drive Arianna, the ex-girlfriend of Andrea, to the borders of France, so out of the borders, they stretch out of the space, geographical space of the tragedy of Italy, and then they stay at the border. Instead of being disoriented, as they still are disoriented, you can see they're actually walking in slightly different direction. But if you look at the movement in the film, they're no longer in completely opposite directions or not talking to each other. They are each following their own pathway in a way, but overall in the film scene, they're moving in the same direction. So there's that hope as well. So the queering of space is actually, the disorientation has actually turned them back into a new orientation, a reorientation. So I would say that there is hope in both endings. And we go back now to what Ahmed was saying before, the important thing is, yes, this disorientation is vital, said Pierpaolo Antonello in Life. And Ahmed added, yes, is it part of a disorganized body, or is it, what do we do with disorientation? But the important thing is, can we do something which brings us hope? Is there some sort of change of direction that brings us to something better or something different, but better, but newer, where we've learned through experiences? So going back to the hospice, my conclusions are that it's really important to be very careful about the films that you choose, because if you were choosing a film that ended up in a way which doesn't give you any sense of hope. I don't mean that all films have to have a sense of hope at the end. They can be cut at any time. They can be left suspended, as often postmodern films are. But it's really important, if working in the hospice with the bereaved, that you do leave them with a sense of hope. And I think that's the point, because there would be no other point. You're working with people that are still disoriented, and you want to aid them through discussion, through watching film and discussion, onto a space where they may either find some legacy, like she finds from her mother's books, or some sort of path that may bring them to make sense of what's happened in a positive way. And I would say that, so I'm concluding here with this, and then I'm open to questions now. And thank you very much for your patience and for listening.
Thank you, Rossella. Thank you for your lecture and for the original perspectives it gives us. Of course, it's time to, yes, Enrico, we have 2 questions. Yes. No, we have an applause from everybody to you. So now it's time to give words to the audience for questions. If you have, you can just raise your hand, or if you prefer, just write in the chat. I can start with something, maybe, so we can leave a few minutes to the audience if we don't have any question. Do we?
Fire away, Maela. I need to go somewhere else for 7:30 here, so I'm happy if you fire away, and then maybe that will spark some more conversation. And I mean, I've got another lecture at 7, but I'm attending. I'm not giving any other lecture tonight. I'm dead. Fire away, yeah.
Okay, so if you, as you prefer, Rossella, if you just need to leave, I don't know.
No, I've got time. I've got about 15
Okay,
minutes.
10 minutes maybe for a discussion. Yes,
No,
10 minutes. Okay, so I just want to ask you something. I can start with Nanni Moretti maybe, and the reason for which you chose this director to study this perspective, and also if you have any other director you could indicate as possible alternative choice. So we can start from the end of your presentation.
Yes, so Nanni Moretti, I mean, I've been studying Nanni Moretti and teaching Nanni Moretti for many years, and my research was not necessarily in this direction, you know, a while ago. But then it was kind of more maybe fortuitous that, you know, when I started to do work with poetry in the hospice, I actually realized that Nanni Moretti was talking a lot about death. He was talking a lot about whether there was the death of a political party or was the death of a dear one, or, you know, he often, I mean, the interesting thing is that when he wrote and directed, so when he wrote, the first time he wrote some of the script of La Stanza del Figlio, the Son's Room, he was actually in 1990, between 1994 and 1995, which was a little bit strange for him because, in fact, it was at the end of 1995, and in 1996 April, his son was born, Pietro. So, you know, he says himself in an interview, you know, I was expecting, my wife was expecting a son, and I had this wonderful project of the death of a son, and I didn't feel it was the right time to do it, you know. So he actually left it then until 2001. But he thought, you know, because he's very interested in psychoanalysis, he's really interesting in working with pain and suffering, and he does that in several ways. And so I just thought, I'm working in a hospice, there's suffering here, there's people dying, you know, why not Nanni Moretti? So I started to delve a little bit deeper in him, and I thought that he was actually a really, having said that, when I gave my lectures in the hospice to the you know, people that were qualifying in palliative care, to professional carers, they actually didn't enjoy Nanni Moretti at all. They hated him even. They just said like, oh, he's like, you know, he's woody, you know, he's not.
Yeah.
So
it's not so easy. Not easy.
It can be a little bit dull sometimes, you know, because his performance is really kind of natural discourse in a house, you know, between husband and wife. There are no kind of background music or anything. It's very real, you know, and so it's very difficult to follow sometimes if you're not particularly interested in that conversation. You go like, oh, come on, I get on with it, you know, and finish it. So I had a quick look at other directors as well, but I haven't done any research on them. And for example, well, one director that I love is Almodovar.
Okay.
And, you know, he wrote Todo sobre mi madre, and that's also about death and coma. And another director that I could think of is Italian director Ferzan Özpetek, when he wrote Saturno contro, Saturn against, and that deals with death. Last year, I think I went to see a film with Colin Firth, which was called, it was Supernova. Don't know if any of you watched it, and that was actually quite interesting. So that's again the story of, and that's doubly queering really, because it's a homosexual couple experiencing. So it's actually quite innovative, I would say, you know, experiencing a preparation to death of a partner, of his partner. And then, I mean, there's other films I'm thinking of, but one in particular is Amy Hardy's 7 Songs for a Long Life. That was actually, written by Amy Hard and directed in the Strathcarron Hospice up in Stirlingshire, here not too far from Edinburgh. And actually I watched it and invited her to speak. So she comes to mind because she talked about it in one of the conferences that I was giving. Do you remember, Fiona, that one at the networking day? So yes, so there are a lot of other directors. There's quite a lot of French directors as well.
Okay.
With palliative care in particular, I was reading recently, there's one on Tout s'est bien passé, and that's the director's called François Ozon. And there's another one which is called Petite Sœur, and again they're all about either experiencing death of a dear one or preparing to death. Quite a
Okay,
lot of
so
stuff on dementia as well. So, you know, there's really quite a lot out there on also.
so a lot of suggestion also for our audience. Thank you.
Yeah. In case if you find anything, I can write it to you, and you can maybe write it to the mailing list if you're interested. And I'll definitely take some photos and send them to you, Mael, if you want to forward them.
Yes, for sure. I can write. I can write here in the chat. So our email. So if someone is interested in any aspect of this lecture or in general on what we analyze in our online seminars, please, you can write us here, PROSE, Pietrisco, then you can email us, Pietrisco.net, and we will be happy to forward all materials that Rossella shared with us and any other information.
I have another 10 minutes. I'm fine for another 10 minutes,
So maybe Cecilia has. Yes, Cecilia has a question. I can see you.
Okay. Okay, very good. And Rossella, I'm really sorry I wasn't able to join at the very beginning, but I loved your lecture. And I loved your ending. I loved the two film stills that you ended with, because as you said, they show hope. Like I was looking at the shadows in the three characters in the son's room, and on the one hand, like you say, they seem to be walking away from each other, but actually their shadows are lining up. So like I was just thinking about how film language brings in another dimension to this.
I mean, there's a lot of scenes like that in that film. You know, they are temporarily looking away from each other, but together. So for example, when they drive Arianna to France, to Ventimiglia, and then over to the border, you know, there's a lot of literary intertext as well, because for example, they are driving throughout the night and they're coming out at dawn, you know, with the light on the other side, and it's very much an infernal kind of Dantean reference to, you know, kind of crossing through the motorway, so journeying through the dark Italy and the patch of their life, and then you know, coming out the other way in the light. It was the light of purgatory, perhaps, because, you know, they don't believe in God, so I don't think that would be stretching a little bit too much. But they say to each other, they say, let's keep each other awake. So there are these moments of very deep intimacy of a couple that have known each other for 20 odd years, you know, and that's, you know, are still together, but they need time apart to metabolize. So yes, I totally agree with you, Celia.
I have two very quick questions, if I may. I was wondering about the collective experience of watching a film like this, where there is this hopeful ending, or with a group. You know, how is this a positive experience? Does this offer opportunities to speak together?
Well, you know, well, as I said, I didn't have a trial with film and a group of patients yet. And I haven't had a trial with bereaved either, but I only had a trial with professional carers. And they didn't like him. So I need to do a little bit more work. I'm going to start working in as a volunteer, but still with poetry in one of the hospices here in Edinburgh. But it won't be for another month or two, because with coronavirus, the personnel is really down, and I need to be accompanied by a second member of staff. But I will talk to my colleague and say, look, can we try with film, and maybe a short?
I had an
Kieslowski, the Polish Kieslowski, he's got really good shorts that are really useful for that, you know, like 20 minutes, or, you know. So sorry, Cecilia, carry on.
No. It's the only reason I was just aware of your time as well. I had a unique experience as when I was doing some of the film screenings with a relatively light film, but the character that in this film went through all of the kinds of failures that could possibly happen. But it was a film that began with an ending and ended with a beginning.
All right, very
And
interesting. Yeah.
yeah,
What was that? Could I ask you for the film? What?
Sure. It's kind of a chick flick, but it worked really well. It's a kind of like the Huckleberry Finn, apparently very light, but
Okay.
there are a lot of undertones and a wonderful score. It was a Cameron Crowe's Elizabethtown. So
Okay.
it's a light Cameron Crowe. Yeah.
Okay, I'll write to you an email. Maybe you can write.
Okay, I can write it in the chat. I'll write it in the chat for you.
There's also a cartoon called Coco, which
Yes.
actually quite good for that.
Yes, about the death.
Yeah,
It's a really interesting perspective. I know because of my son, of course. We also have
anymore, but
we also have two suggestions from the audience from Enrico that suggests The Perfect Circle that was filmed in the hospice near Reggio Emilia. Thank you, Enrico, and also Teresa that suggests as The Metamorphosis of Birds.
Oh, Elizabethtown. Okay.
Okay. So
okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
For you. So I don't know if Cecilia, do you have anything to add?
Just a tiny, and I don't really want to be manipulating or monopolizing it, but with this experience, what happened there was actually a young woman who had just been through bereavement. Her mother had died the week before. And I nearly died when I realized that this person was in the audience, and there was actually, and one of the things this character deals with is the death of his father. And at the end of it, I spoke to her when I realized this. I said, do you really want to watch this film now? It might not be the best. And she said, I need to be with people. And at the end, she wrote we did some written exercises. And what she said was, being able to accompany, as the character spread his father's ashes, she said, I was on my journey with the other people. And she said, I heard sniffles in the audience as well. So this is just why, I was wondering about this collective experience that even though she said, on the one hand, I was on my own because it's a dark room, but she said, I really felt that the presence of the others, and this helped me on my journey. And I don't know, I just kind of threw that in there.
No, that's interesting, because that's exactly the experience I had when I watched the 7 Songs for a Long Life. I cried my eyes out when I watched it on my own, because I had to prepare for the event. I had to watch it first. So the second time was a little bit less, kind of proved, but it was an experience in the dark room, because we projected it for the whole audience. Everybody was in tears. Everybody. Do you remember? I don't know if you were there, Fiona, that evening. Were you there? Or maybe you weren't in the thing, but
at the rock.
At the projection at the Biotheatre, I remember we had dinner.
Yes, I think I was there.
Did you watch the film?
In the evening, I think I did. I've seen the film. Anyway, sorry, it was so many years ago, I can't remember.
Yeah,
I have seen the film.
Yeah. So, that was about 4 years ago, wasn't it? But everybody was just like, I mean, we had a bunch of actors which were going to do some work afterwards. They said, we can't do it anymore. It's too much. It's too much. It's too emotional. So, I totally agree. I mean, I'd love to experience it in a group and see how people react, and what they discuss, especially if they feel like discussing, because the idea is showing them so that they discuss it, so that they may share their experience voluntarily. We don't want to force anything. So that's the whole purpose, is that so that they are in the third space room as human beings with their feelings, their emotions, their stories. And that's really the end purpose. But then obviously you can't take them in a room and say, tell me your story. It's got to come out spontaneously, because otherwise it's not therapeutic. It's the opposite.
For this, just an aside, the writing, I think the fact they had time after the screening, they had time to write. There were some questions they could write to. So before there was any kind of a discussion, there was this individual reflection. So
Yeah,
everyone had the experience of reacting, and
Yeah.
then those who wished to shared or not.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh, that's really interesting.
but it was a wonderful lecture, wonderful, wonderful.
Oh, thank you very much. And I will probably need to close here, I'm afraid. I need
Yeah,
to
sure.
the next thing.
So, of course, thank you very much, Rossella, and thank you very much, all of you, for having been here. We hope to see you in just 2 weeks. So we have the next appointment on the 31 of March. See you there with Elena Ferrante, the Italian writer. So thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Very much.
Right, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.